never expected that walking into my daughter's room would change my life forever. But in that moment, when I saw him, her boyfriend, everything unraveled. One mistake led to another, and soon I was trapped in a secret I couldn't escape. What happens when the truth comes out? Stay tuned. When I opened the door to my daughter's bedroom, I never expected to see him like that. Nate was standing there dripping wet, a white towel slung low around his hips, water still glistening on his muscular chest. For a moment I froze, unsure whether to apologize or simply shut the door and pretend I hadn't seen anything. But my brain stalled, and instead, my eyes locked with his. "Mrs. Reynolds?" he finally said, his voice soft and uncertain. I stammered, fumbling for words. I'm sorry, I didn't realize you were. I just needed to grab the laundry basket." His hand twitched, reaching up to run through his damp hair. "No problem, I'll grab it for you." He stepped toward me, the towel precariously shifting on his waist, and my heart skipped a beat. It wasn't just the situation. It was the way he looked at me, almost like he wasn't sure what to say either. My cheeks flushed hot, and I forced myself to avert my gaze. I hadn't felt this self-conscious in years, maybe decades. Before I could embarrass myself further, I blurted, "No, it's fine. I'll come back later." Then I turned on my heel and practically fled from the room. The hallway felt cooler, but my pulse still raced. My hands were shaking as I closed my own bedroom door and leaned against it, my breathing uneven. What was wrong with me? He was just a kid, a college kid, for God's sake, my daughter's boyfriend. Yet I couldn't shake the way his presence lingered in the air, how something so innocent had felt charged. Sada, 1,500 words. The next morning, I couldn't help but replay the moment in my mind, though I tried to brush it off. I went about my usual routine, packing my husband's lunch, throwing in a load of laundry, and scrolling through emails for work. My husband Tim sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and his nose buried in his phone. The same routine we'd shared every morning for years. "Busy day at the office?" I asked, more out of obligation than genuine curiosity. He didn't even look up. "Yeah, back-to-back meetings." I sighed, stirring sugar into my tea. We had long stopped asking each other deeper questions, or really even looking at each other, and I wasn't sure when that had started. Our relationship wasn't bad, per se. It was just stale, comfortable, but utterly devoid of excitement. As I glanced over at him, I couldn't help but notice how little he'd changed in the last 10 years. Still wearing the same basic button-ups, the same aftershave. But it wasn't just his appearance, it was the way he moved through life, so predictably, so dispassionately. "Don't forget the dry cleaning," I reminded him as he grabbed his keys. "There, I got it," he muttered, distracted. As he left, the house fell into its usual silence, but instead of feeling relief, I felt hollow. I sat there in the empty kitchen, staring at the faint rings left by his coffee mug on the table. Later that afternoon, my daughter Hannah came home with Nate. I heard their laughter echo through the front door before they even walked in. Hannah had that glowing smile on her face, the kind that came so easily to her when she was with him. I envied her for it. "Mom," she called, dropping her bag by the door. "Nate's staying for dinner, okay?" "Sure, honey," I called back. "I'll whip something up." As I moved around the kitchen, I could hear them talking in the living room, her bubbly voice, his low chuckle. Every now and then I'd glance out and catch a glimpse of him, stretched out on the couch like he belonged there. There was something about him that unsettled me, though I couldn't quite put my finger on it. He had this easy confidence, the kind that made him seem older than his 21 years. "Do you need help, Mrs. Reynolds?" His voice startled me as he appeared in the kitchen doorway. I turned, holding a cutting board. No, I've got it under control, thanks though. He smiled, leaning against the counter. You're always cooking something amazing when I'm here. I don't know how you do it. It's just practice, I said, feeling self-conscious under his gaze. There it was again, that lingering look. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, just his polite demeanor. But my body betrayed me, heat creeping up my neck. There's nothing more powerful than saying something to a child. Then, if you change your mind, let me know. Huh. As he walked back to the living room, I released a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. That night, after dinner, I tried to shake off the strange energy that seemed to hang in the air. I sat on the couch with my book while Tim scrolled through his phone as usual. Hannah and Nate had gone upstairs to watch a movie in her room, their laughter muffled through the walls. But I couldn't focus on the words in front of me. My thoughts kept drifting to Nate, to the way his smile lingered in my mind, to the way he'd stood too close in the kitchen. My cheeks burned with guilt. When Tim finally went to bed, I stayed behind, pretending to read but really just staring blankly at the page. I couldn't understand why I felt this way, why a college kid could make me feel things I hadn't felt in years. The following week, the moment in the bedroom seemed to haunt me more than it should have. I started to notice little things. How often Nate seemed to look my way when no one else was watching, or the way his compliments felt a touch too personal. It was nothing overt, nothing I could point to and say, this is wrong. But it was there, unspoken and heavy. One evening, Hannah and Tim both left the house. She had a late-night study group, and he was at yet another networking dinner. Nate stayed behind, claiming he had homework to do. I tried to avoid him, keeping myself busy with laundry and chores. But it was no use. He found me in the laundry room, struggling to lift a basket full of towels. Here, let me help, he said, stepping forward and grabbing the basket before I could protest. His hands brushed against mine, and I felt a jolt, like static electricity. I pulled back quickly, mumbling a thank you, but his gaze lingered. You don't have to do everything alone, you know, he said softly. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words caught in my throat. There was something in his voice, something that made my chest tighten. I should get back to work, I said finally, avoiding his gaze as I turned and walked out of the room. But as I climbed the stairs, my heart pounded, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something I wasn't ready to face. The night it happened, I told myself it wasn't going to happen. I told myself I would keep my distance, that whatever this strange tension was between Nate and me would dissolve if I just ignored it. I went to bed early, hoping to avoid any awkward encounters. But sleep didn't come easily. I tossed and turned, my mind replaying every lingering glance, every accidental touch, every unspoken moment. The house was quiet. Tim was still out at his networking dinner, and Hannah hadn't come home from her study group. I tried to focus on the sound of the rain tapping against the window, but my thoughts wouldn't stop racing. Eventually, I gave up on sleep and headed downstairs to grab a glass of water. The kitchen was dimly lit, the warm glow of the under-cabinet lights casting soft shadows. As I stood at the sink, sipping my water and staring out at the darkened backyard, I heard the soft creak of a floorboard behind me. I turned, startled, to find Nate standing in the doorway. "Oh!" I exclaimed, clutching the glass to my chest. "You scared me." "Sorry," he said, his voice low and apologetic. I couldn't sleep. His hair was tousled, like he'd been lying in bed, and he was wearing a loose t-shirt and sweatpants. He looked different, less put together, more vulnerable. It caught me off guard. "Me neither," I admitted, setting my glass on the counter. "I guess it's just one of those nights." He stepped closer, leaning against the counter opposite me. His presence filled the small space between us, and I was suddenly hyper-aware of everything. The faint scent of his cologne, the way the soft fabric of his shirt clung to his chest, the warmth radiating from his body even at a distance. Rain does that sometimes, he said, nodding toward the window. It's calming, but also, I don't know, it keeps your mind going. I smiled faintly, appreciating the attempt at small talk. Yeah, I guess so. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us wasn't awkward, it was charged, heavy with something unspoken. I felt my pulse quicken, and I hated myself for it. This was wrong. He was my daughter's boyfriend, for God's sake. I shouldn't even be in the same room with him, let alone feeling whatever this was. I've been meaning to thank you, he said, suddenly, breaking the silence, for everything you do. You've been really kind to me, letting me spend so much time here. I know I probably take up a lot of space. It's no problem, I said quickly, brushing off his gratitude. You're part of the family now. You make Hannah happy, and that's what matters. He smiled at that, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Something deeper, something more. Still, I really appreciate it. Not everyone would be so welcoming. I looked down at my hands, unsure how to respond. My heart was beating so loudly I was sure he could hear it. You're easy to have around, I said finally, my voice quieter than I intended. When I glanced up, his gaze was fixed on me. It wasn't the polite, casual look of a guest. It was intense, searching, as if he were trying to read my mind, to uncover the thoughts I was trying so hard to suppress. My breath hitched, and I took a small step back, needing to put some distance between us. I should probably head back to bed, I said, my voice trembling slightly. Big day tomorrow. But as I turned to leave, his voice stopped me. Wait, I froze, my hand hovering over the light switch. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. If I looked at him, I didn't trust myself not to crumble. What is it? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't want this to be weird, he said, his tone soft and careful. But I feel like, I don't know, I feel like there's something between us. My heart plummeted into my stomach. My worst fear, the thing I'd been trying so hard to deny, had just been spoken aloud. I turned slowly, my eyes meeting his. Nate, I began, but I didn't know what to say. How could I tell him he was wrong when I wasn't even sure he was? I know I shouldn't feel this way, he continued, stepping closer. And I know you probably don't feel the same, but I can't help it. The distance between us was shrinking, and I was running out of excuses to keep it there. My brain screamed at me to stop this, to tell him to go back upstairs and forget he ever said anything. But my body betrayed me, frozen in place as he closed the gap. I think we should forget about this, I said weakly, my voice barely audible. This isn't right. I know, he said, but his eyes told a different story. I've never met someone like you before. You're incredible, Mrs. Reynolds. You're beautiful and smart, and you make me feel... Stop? I cut him off, my voice breaking. Please, you can't say things like that. But he didn't stop. He took one more step, and suddenly he was right in front of me. I could feel the heat of his body, the electricity in the air between us. My chest tightened, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. Tell me to leave, he whispered, his voice low and pleading. If you want me to walk away, I will. But if there's even a part of you that feels the same... His words hung in the air, and for a moment time seemed to stand still. I thought about everything. About my marriage, my daughter, the life I'd built over the years. I thought about how much I stood to lose, how much damage this could cause. But then I thought about the emptiness I'd been living with for so long. The ache I hadn't even realized was there until someone came along and made me feel alive again. I can't, I said, though the words came out more like a plea than a command. This isn't fair to Hannah. It isn't fair to anyone. He reached up, gently brushing a strand of hair from my face. His touch was soft, tentative, as if he were afraid I might pull away. But I didn't. I couldn't. My body betrayed me again, leaning into his touch even as my mind screamed at me to stop. I don't want to hurt anyone, he said softly, but I can't pretend I don't feel this. Before I could respond, he closed the distance between us completely, his lips capturing mine in a kiss that was both hesitant and desperate. For a moment, I froze, torn between pulling away and giving in, but then something inside me broke, and I kissed him back. It wasn't a rational decision. It was instinct, pure and unfiltered. His hands moved to my waist, pulling me closer, and I let him. My heart pounded in my chest, a mix of guilt and exhilaration coursing through me. When we finally pulled apart, breathless and wide-eyed, reality came crashing down around me. I stepped back, shaking my head. This can't happen, I said, my voice trembling. We can't do this. He nodded, but the look in his eyes told me he didn't believe me. I'm sorry, he said, his voice raw. I didn't mean to. Just go, I said, turning away. Please, just go. I heard his footsteps retreating, the soft creak of the stairs as he went back to his room. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my heart racing and my hands trembling. I knew I'd made a mistake, a terrible, irreversible mistake. But as I stood there in the silence, I couldn't deny the truth. For the first time in years, I felt alive. I told myself it wouldn't happen again. That night in the kitchen was a mistake, an impulse, a fleeting moment of weakness. But as the days passed, I realized something terrifying. I didn't regret it. I should have. God knows I should have felt sick to my stomach with guilt. But every time I replayed that night in my mind, the heat of his breath against my skin, the way his hands had gripped my waist, the desperation in his kiss, I felt something else entirely. Desire. And that desire was dangerous. The tension between us grew unbearable over the next few weeks. Every glance, every accidental touch, every second spent in the same room. It was like a silent conversation neither of us could stop having. At first, I tried to avoid him. I went out of my way to be absent when I knew he'd be around. If he and Hannah were in the living room, I stayed upstairs. If they were in the kitchen, I busied myself with chores in another part of the house. But it didn't work, because no matter how much I tried to ignore it, he wouldn't let me. One evening, I was in the laundry room, folding clothes and desperately trying to focus on anything other than the ache in my chest. I didn't hear him come in at first, not until I turned around and nearly gasped. He was leaning against the door frame, arms crossed, watching me. I swallowed hard. Nate, what are you doing in here? His eyes flickered to the folded laundry. You always seem to be hiding in here. I forced a laugh, trying to play it off. Not hiding, just keeping busy. He took a slow step forward, closing the distance between us. You've been avoiding me. My heart pounded. I'm not. You are. His voice was calm, steady, but there was something else underneath it, a quiet intensity that made my knees weak. Why? I turned away, pretending to focus on a pile of towels. You know why. Do I? Another step closer, because I keep thinking about that night, and I don't think I'm the only one. I closed my eyes. We can't, Nate. His breath was warm against the back of my neck. Then why does it feel like we already have? I felt his fingers ghost over my hip, a barely there touch, and my whole body tensed. He was right. We had already crossed the line, and now there was no going back. I spun around, intending to push him away, but instead, my hands landed on his chest. He was so close, too close, and the moment my palms made contact with him, I felt it again. That electric charge, the one that had been simmering between us for weeks. His hand came up to my jaw, tilting my face up to meet his gaze. His eyes weren't asking for permission. They were daring me to stop him. But I didn't. I should have, but instead I let him kiss me. That night changed everything. It wasn't a one-time mistake anymore. It was something deeper, something neither of us could seem to stop. We found moments to steal, places to hide, whispered touches in the hallway, lingering gazes across the dinner table, the heat of his palm against my lower back when no one was looking. It was reckless, it was dangerous, and it was intoxicating. It became a game we played, seeing how far we could push before getting caught. And with every brush of his fingertips against my skin, every heated look, every quiet, "I can't stop thinking about you," murmured in the dark, the guilt inside me started to crumble. One afternoon, everything nearly fell apart. I was in the kitchen, washing dishes, when I heard the front door close. I turned just in time to see Nate entering the room. He glanced around quickly before stepping closer. "Hannah's not home," he murmured. I stiffened. "She'll be back soon." He ignored my warning, his hands finding my waist. "5 minutes," he said, tilting his head down so that his lips were just inches from my neck. "That's all I need." My breath caught. I knew I should push him away. I should tell him no. Instead, I melted. His lips brushed against my collarbone, slow and teasing, and God help me, I let him. I was so caught up in the moment, in the heat of his touch, that I didn't hear the sound of the front door opening again. But I felt him freeze against me. And then I heard Hannah's voice. "Nate, Mom?" My entire body went cold. I shoved him away so fast he nearly stumbled backward. This was it. This was the moment everything came crashing down. Hannah stood in the doorway, her brow furrowed in confusion. "What are you guys doing?" My throat was dry. I forced a smile, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst from my chest. "Oh." Nate was just helping me with the dishes. Her eyes darted between us, suspicion flickering across her face. Nate, to his credit, recovered quickly. "Yeah, your mom was struggling with the sink," he said smoothly, flashing her a grin. "Thought I'd be a gentleman and help." For a moment I thought she might question it, that she might see right through the lie. But then she shrugged. "Well, whatever. I'm starving." I turned back to the sink, gripping the counter for support as she walked to the fridge. My hands were shaking. Nate lingered for a second longer, his fingers grazing the small of my back as he passed. I nearly collapsed. That near discovery should have been enough to end things. But it wasn't. Because later that night, when I was lying in bed staring at the ceiling, my phone vibrated beside me. I reached for it with trembling hands, my heart hammering as I read the message. "Nate, I can still taste you." I closed my eyes. This was going to ruin me, and I didn't care. I knew it was coming, the inevitable moment when everything would come crashing down, when the secret, the thrill, the stolen moments, it would all come to light. But I still wasn't prepared for how violently it would unravel, because it wasn't just a slow unraveling. It was an explosion. It started with a single text message. I was in the kitchen, preparing dinner while my husband sat at the dining table, flipping through his phone absent-mindedly. Hannah had gone upstairs to shower, leaving me and Nate alone downstairs, though we kept a safe distance. The tension between us was unbearable. The need to touch him, to feel his warmth, it was all consuming. I had just set a pot of water on the stove when my phone vibrated on the counter. Without thinking, I glanced down at the screen. "Nate, I can't stop thinking about last night." Heat flushed up my neck, my pulse racing as I quickly grabbed my phone and turned it over, heart hammering against my ribs. But it was too late, because just as I did, my husband's voice cut through the air. "Who's texting you?" I froze. It was casual, an innocent question, but I felt the weight of it press down on me like a stone. "Worst, Hannah," I lied, keeping my voice light as I forced a smile. "She's probably reminding me to save her some food." Tim nodded, not thinking twice, but Nate saw everything. I could feel his eyes on me, could sense the tension in his posture. And I knew, deep down, that this was going to break us. The next few days were agonizing. I tried to keep my distance, but Nate wouldn't let me. Every stolen glance, every lingering touch when no one was watching, it was all building to something dangerous. And then it happened, the moment I had been dreading. It was a Saturday night. Tim had gone to visit his brother out of town, and Hannah was out with friends. The house was empty, and I should have known better than to let myself be alone with Nate. But when he showed up at my bedroom door, his expression dark and desperate, I let him in anyway. He didn't hesitate. The moment the door shut behind him, his hands were on me, pulling me against him, his breath hot against my skin. "I can't do this anymore," he murmured, his lips grazing my collarbone. "I can't pretend like I don't want you every second of every day." I should have pushed him away. I should have told him to leave. But instead, I pulled him closer, because I couldn't stop either. Because I wanted him just as much as he wanted me. And when our lips met, when his hands gripped my waist, when we fell into my bed together, it wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. One I made willingly. One I made knowing that if we got caught, it would destroy everything. And then we got caught. It happened so fast, I barely had time to process it. 1 second, we were tangled together, lost in the moment. And the next, the bedroom door flew open, and there she was, Hannah, standing in the doorway, her face twisted in horror, betrayal, disgust. For a long, agonizing moment, no one moved, no one spoke. I couldn't breathe. Nate bolted upright, scrambling for his clothes, his face pale as he stammered, "Hannah, But she didn't wait for an explanation. She just let out a sharp, ragged laugh. A laugh so bitter, so filled with pain, it cut through me like a knife. "Oh my God," she whispered, shaking her head. "You're actually sleeping with my boyfriend." I opened my mouth, but what could I say? There is no excuse. No way to spin this into anything other than what it was. I had betrayed her, the one person who had trusted me more than anyone in the world. I reached for her. "Hannah, please, don't touch me." Her voice was ice, her eyes filled with rage. "I can't believe you," she spat. "You're my mother. You're supposed to—" She cut herself off, shaking her head violently. "You're disgusting." Nate stood there, looking like a deer caught in headlights. "Anna," he tried, his voice desperate. "I didn't mean for this to happen." She let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Didn't mean for this to happen," she repeated. "So what, you tripped and fell into her bed?" I winced, shame flooding through me. "Anna," I whispered, "I love you." "No," she snapped, her voice breaking. "You don't. If you did, you wouldn't have done this." Tears burned in my eyes. "I never meant to hurt you." "Bullshit." Her eyes flicked to Nate, and the hatred in her gaze made me sick. "You're dead to me," she hissed. Then she turned on her heel and stormed out of the room. I heard the front door slam, and then she was gone. The weight of what I had done crushed me. I sat there in the wreckage of my own making, my breath shaky, my hands trembling. Nate stood in the corner, running a hand through his hair, his face pale. "What do we do?" he whispered. I laughed bitterly, wiping at my tears. "There's nothing to do," I said, my voice hollow. "It's over." He swallowed hard, nodding slowly. "Do you think she'll tell your husband?" A fresh wave of nausea rolled through me. "I don't know." Silence stretched between us, and for the first time since this whole thing started, I realized I didn't want this. Not really, because what was left of it now, the excitement, the thrill, the rush, it was gone. All that was left was the wreckage. All that was left was pain. Hours later, my phone buzzed with a single message from Hannah. Hannah, don't call me. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I had lost her, and I had no one to blame but myself. The silence in the house was unbearable. Nate had left, Hannah was gone, and I was alone. For the first time in years, I had gotten exactly what I wanted, and it had destroyed everything. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at my reflection in the darkened mirror across the room. My hair was a mess, my skin flushed, my eyes swollen from crying. I looked like a stranger. I barely had time to process what had happened before I heard the front door slam. And then, my husband's voice. Where is she? Tim's voice was sharp, furious, like he already knew. I barely made it downstairs before he spotted me at the top of the staircase. His face was unreadable, but his fists were clenched, his whole body taut with barely contained rage. He knew. Everything inside me went cold. Don't, he snapped, taking a step forward. Don't even try. I gripped the railing to steady myself. He held up his phone, his hands shaking. Hannah had told him. Of course she had. Mama sent me a text, he said, his voice eerily calm. She didn't say much, just 2 sentences. I had lived here for 20 years. I had built a marriage here. I had raised a daughter here. I had destroyed it all here. And now, this was no longer my home. I took a slow, deep breath, my fingers trembling as I clutched the envelope in my hands. 3 letters. 3 final words to the people who had once been my everything. I placed them on the kitchen counter, the same counter where I had cooked meals, sorted through bills, shared small talk over morning coffee. The past whispered to me in every corner of this house, but I refused to listen. Not anymore. To my husband, Tim. We spent 2 decades pretending we were something we weren't. I loved you once, in a way that felt real, but maybe it was just an illusion. Something I needed to believe so I wouldn't see the cracks forming beneath us. I made my mistakes, and I'll carry them with me forever, but you did too. The difference is, I faced mine, you buried yours. And maybe that's why we failed. Maybe that's why I'm walking away now. Not out of anger, not out of revenge, but because there's nothing left to save. You can keep the house, keep the memories, keep whatever parts of me you want, but I won't be here. Goodbye, Tim. To my lover, Nate. You were never supposed to matter, and yet you did. I won't lie, I wanted you, but not for the reasons you think. I didn't want you. I wanted the feeling you gave me. The rush, the attention, the illusion of something more. But we were both fooling ourselves, weren't we? You're young. You have a whole life ahead of you. Don't waste it on regrets. Don't become the person who looks back and wonders if they made the right choices. Make new ones, better ones that don't come with this much destruction. We were never meant to last, and now we don't have to pretend anymore. Goodbye, Nate. To my daughter, Hannah. I thought I knew you. I thought I had raised you to be good, to be kind, to be better than I was. But maybe I was wrong. Or maybe you were always this way, and I just refused to see it. You hated me for what I did, but you knew all along what your father was doing. And you let me take the blame. You turned your back on me, not because I hurt you, but because it was convenient. Because it was easier to destroy me than to face the truth of what you had done. And I let you. But not anymore. I'm not your enemy. I never was. But I won't fight to be your mother anymore either. Not when I was never really your mother to begin with. Goodbye, Hannah. I had spent so long suffocating inside that house. Now, for the first time, I could breathe. I walked to my car, the gravel crunching beneath my feet. I could feel the weight of my past pulling at me, begging me to look back, to reconsider, to stay. But I knew better now. Some endings weren't meant to be rewritten. Some goodbyes weren't meant to be undone. So I got in the car, and I didn't look back. The drive to nowhere. I didn't have a destination. Just a road. Just the hum of the engine beneath me. Just the endless stretch of highway ahead. For the first time in years, I didn't have to be someone's wife. I didn't have to be someone's mother. I didn't have to be someone's mistake. I was just me, and that was enough. I had spent months begging for forgiveness, months waiting for someone to save me. But now I realized I didn't need saving. I needed escape. And that's exactly what I was taking. His throat bobbed as he swallowed, as if even repeating the words out loud might break him. Mom's been sleeping with Nate. I'm done with both of them. I sucked in a sharp breath. My vision blurred. Hannah? Tim's voice rose, cutting through the air like a blade. How could you? I had no answer. Because what could I possibly say? That I was lonely? That I was drowning in a marriage that felt like it had been dead for years? That I had wanted, no, needed, to feel something, anything again? None of it mattered. None of it would ever justify what I had done. You slept with our daughter's boyfriend, he said, his voice low and shaking with disbelief. Do you have any idea what you've done to her? To me? Tears burned in my eyes. Tim, he snapped, pointing a finger at me. You don't get to speak right now. You don't get to explain this away. His jaw clenched and he shook his head like he couldn't believe he was even standing here having this conversation. I gave you everything, he muttered. I was working my ass off for us, for this family. And this is what you do? I flinched. You were never here. His laugh was hollow, humorless. Oh, so it's my fault? I wiped at my face, my hands trembling. That's not what I meant. Then what do you mean? His voice cracked with something raw, something painful. Because from where I'm standing, you threw away 20 years of marriage for a damn college kid. His words hit me like a slap. It sounded disgusting when he said it out loud. And it was. He turned away, pacing like he couldn't bear to look at me. His hands raked through his hair, his breaths coming out short and uneven. This isn't just about us, he said finally. This is about Hannah. You're her mother. I winced at the word. He trusted you, he continued, his voice tight. And you betrayed her in the worst possible way. The weight of my mistake settled deeper into my bones. I know, I whispered. I know I did. He let out a breath, his shoulders sagging. For the first time, I saw something other than anger in his expression. Real, gut-wrenching, bone-deep pain. You were supposed to be better than this, he murmured. The words gutted me. And then, the final blow. I wanted divorce. I knew it was coming. The moment Hannah walked in on us, I knew I had lost everything. But hearing him say the words out loud, it made it real. Something inside me cracked. Tim, I choked out, please don't do this. His eyes flashed with something sharp. Don't do this, he repeated. Are you serious? His voice rose, his hands flying up in exasperation. You already did this. You made this decision when you let that boy into our bed. I recoiled, shame washing over me in waves. I didn't mean... Stop, he snapped. Just stop. His chest rose and fell rapidly, his whole body vibrating with emotion. "I'll figure out the paperwork," he said, his voice suddenly flat, emotionless. "I'll give you time to find a place. But we're done." The finality of it suffocated me, but I had no right to ask him to stay. Tim turned away, heading toward the front door. For a moment I thought he was leaving, that he would walk out and never come back. But then he hesitated, and when he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "She might never forgive you," he said, "but I hope for your sake that you learn how to forgive yourself." Then he was gone. The door clicked shut behind him, and just like that, my life shattered. I stood there in the empty house, my breathing shallow, my hands limp at my sides. Hannah was gone. Tim was gone, and I had nothing left. For the first time since this entire thing started, I realized the affair wasn't the exciting, passionate escape I had convinced myself it was. It was a death sentence, one I had written with my own hands. And now I had to live with it, alone. I woke up to an empty house. The silence was suffocating. For 20 years I had lived in this home, filled with laughter, conversations, and the small, everyday noises of family life. The creak of the stairs when Hannah ran up to her room, the hum of Tim's electric razor in the mornings, the clinking of dishes as we cleaned up after dinner. Now, there was nothing, just the steady ticking of the clock on the wall and the hollow ache in my chest. I had spent the night on the couch. I hadn't meant to, but after Tim left, after Hannah stormed out, I just sat there. I stared at the front door for hours, as if maybe, just maybe, one of them would come back. They didn't. At some point, exhaustion won and I drifted into a restless sleep. But now, in the cold light of morning, reality crashed over me like a tidal wave. I had ruined everything. My marriage, my relationship with my daughter, my sense of self. All for what? For stolen moments of passion? For the brief illusion of feeling young and wanted again? I covered my face with my hands, exhaling shakily. What the hell had I done? A knock at the door jolted me out of my thought. My stomach twisted. For a split second, hope surged through me. Maybe Hannah had come back. Maybe Tim had cooled off and wanted to talk. I practically ran to the door, yanking it open. But it wasn't Hannah. And it wasn't Tim. It was Nate. I stared at him, words failing me. He looked awful. Dark circles rimmed his eyes, his face pale, his usual confidence shattered. He shifted uncomfortably, rubbing the back of his neck. He hesitated, then sighed. "I wasn't sure if I should come." I swallowed hard. "Why are you here?" He let out a humorless laugh. "I don't know. I guess I just wanted to make sure you were okay." I exhaled sharply, stepping back. "You shouldn't be here." I know. Neither of us moved. Neither of us knew how to fix this. Nate's voice was quieter when he spoke again. "Don't talk to me." I closed my eyes. "Lena." He nodded. "She blocked my number, told me to lose her number forever." "Good," I wanted to say. She deserved better. Instead, I whispered, "I'm sorry." He shook his head. "No, I'm the one who's sorry." I finally met his gaze. He meant it. But sorry wasn't going to change anything. A long silence stretched between us. I knew why he had come, not just to check on me, but because some twisted part of us still felt drawn to each other, even now, after everything had crumbled around us. I could see it in the way his hands clenched at his sides, the way his gaze flickered down to my lips before he forced himself to look away. For weeks we had lived in a world where consequences didn't exist, where rules were things we could ignore. But now there was nothing left but the damage. "Nate," I said softly, my voice breaking. This has to end. His jaw tensed, but he nodded. I know. I wrapped my arms around myself. We destroyed life. He swallowed hard. I know. More silence. Then he turned to leave. But before he stepped off the porch, he hesitated. Yeah, he exhaled, shaking his head. I hope someday she forgives you. I flinched. Not us, just me, because Hannah would never forgive him. And deep down, I knew I didn't want her to. The door shut behind him, and just like that, it was over. For real this time. I leaned against the door, pressing my forehead against the wood. Tears burned in my eyes. But I let him go. And maybe, just maybe, that was the first right thing I had done in a very long time. It's been 3 months. 3 months since I lost everything. 3 months since my daughter walked out of my life. 3 months since my husband filed for divorce. 3 months since Nate left and I swore I'd never see him again. And still, I wake up every morning expecting to hear footsteps in the hallway, voices in the kitchen, laughter from the living room. But there's nothing. Just the steady hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock, and the quiet ache that settled deep in my bones. Hannah never came home. I don't know where she is, not really. I heard from a mutual friend that she moved in with a classmate, someone from her study group. I've called, I've texted, she doesn't respond. At first, I tried telling myself that she just needed space, that eventually she'd come back and we'd find a way to repair this mess. But now I don't know if she'll ever forgive me. And I don't blame her, because how do you forgive the one person who is supposed to protect you when they're the one who betrayed you the most? Tim came by last week, not to talk, not to reconcile, just to finalize the divorce papers. I hadn't seen him since the night he left. When I opened the door and he stepped inside, it was like looking at a stranger. His face was thinner, his hair messier. He looked tired, not just physically, but the kind of exhaustion that settles deep into your soul when you've been hurt beyond repair. He didn't say much. I didn't ask how I was. He didn't say my name. He just handed me the papers and a pen. I signed them without hesitation. Not because I didn't love him, not because I wanted this, but because I knew it was what he needed, what we both needed, because after everything I had done, there was no coming back from this, no undoing the damage, no rewriting the story. Some things are too broken to fix, and this was one of them. After he left, I sat on the couch for a long time, staring at the papers in my hands. And for the first time in months, I allowed myself to feel it all. The regret, the shame, the emptiness. Because that's all that was left now. A hollow shell of the life I had destroyed with my own hands. And the worst part? I didn't even know why I did it. Maybe it was because I had felt invisible for so long. Maybe it was because I had convinced myself that I was missing something, that I deserved more than what I had. Maybe it was because I had been chasing a feeling, not a person, because that's all it ever was, a feeling, a fleeting, intoxicating rush, the illusion of being wanted again. But in the end, that's all it had been, an illusion, one that shattered the moment it was exposed to the light. I don't know if I'll ever get Hannah back. I don't know if Tim will ever be able to look at me without resentment in his eyes. I don't know if I'll ever feel whole again. But what I do know is this. I have to learn to live with it, to live with the choices I made, to live with the consequences, to live with the woman I became, even if I don't recognize her anymore. Some nights I still hear a knock at the door, and for a split second I hope that it's Hannah, that she's changed her mind, that she's ready to forgive me. but it never is. It's just the wind, just an empty house, just another reminder of everything I lost, everything I threw away, and everything I'll never get back. I never thought one mistake could ruin my entire life, but it did. And now all I have left is the regret, the silence, and the memory of a love that was never supposed to happen. 3 months of silence, 3 months of loneliness, 3 months of staring at my reflection and barely recognizing the woman I had become. I had lost my daughter. I had lost my husband. I had lost the life I once knew. And yet, no matter how much I tried to move forward, the past clung to me like a shadow. Then, on a random Wednesday afternoon, my phone rang.
I almost didn't answer.
The number was blocked. Something about it felt off. But against my better judgment, I picked up. Himon? A woman's voice, low, steady, unfamiliar, cut through the silence. You should know the truth.
My stomach twisted.
Who is this? I asked, gripping the phone tighter. The woman exhaled softly, like she had been expecting that question. Check your email.
And then the line went dead.
A chill ran down my spine. Something about this wasn't right. Why now? Who was she? I hesitated for a moment, then grabbed my laptop and opened my inbox.
One new email.
No subject line, no message, just a single video attachment. My pulse pounded as I clicked, and what I saw changed everything. The video. At first, the footage was grainy. A dimly lit hotel room. 2 figures tangled in the sheet. I frowned, confused, until I recognized him. TM, my ex-husband.
Lying in bed, shirtless, a smug smile on his face.
And then her. The woman next to him turned, her face illuminated by the bedside lamp, and my blood ran cold. It was Maggie, Hannah's best friend. My breath caught in my throat. My hands clenched into fists. The video played on, but I couldn't focus on the words. All I could hear was the faint murmur of voices. Tim's low, smooth voice, Maggie's soft laughter, their bodies intertwined. The way he looked at her, the way she touched him so casually, like this wasn't new, like this had been going on for a long time. The nausea hit me so fast I barely made it to the sink before I dry heaved. For months, I had been drowning in guilt. I had been punishing myself, convinced I was the only one who had destroyed this family. But now, I knew the truth. Tim had been cheating on me, and not just with anyone, with my daughter's best friend. The real betrayal. My hands shook as I grabbed my phone and scrolled through my contacts. I hovered over Hannah's name, my heart hammering. Did she know? Had she known all along? The thought made me sick. I pressed call, straight to voicemail. I tried again. Nothing. She still wasn't speaking to me. And now I realized it wasn't just because of what I had done. It was because Tim had spun the story in his favor. Because while I had been the easy one to blame, he had been the one with the real secret. And Hannah had chosen his lie over my truth. The confrontation. I didn't plan. I just drove. 15 minutes later, I was standing outside Tim's new apartment, my fists clenched at my sides. I pounded on the door. The second he opened it, I saw it, the flicker of panic in his eyes. He knew why I was here. You slept with Maggie, I said, my voice shaking. Tim hesitated, and in that hesitation I saw everything. He wasn't going to deny it. He wasn't going to beg for forgiveness, because deep down he knew I had already lost everything. And he had won, or at least he thought he had. Where did you get that video? He asked finally, voice tight. I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. You really think that's what matters? Tim exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. It wasn't serious. I scoffed. You were screwing our daughter's best friend, I spat. How long, Tim? How long were you sleeping with her before I became the bad guy? His jaw clenched. Don't turn this around, he said. You're the one who what? I snapped. Who cheated first? Who got caught first? Is that what this is? His silence was my answer. And then the real question hit me. Does Hannah know? His reaction told me everything. The way his eyes darted to the side, the way his lips pressed into a thin line, the way his fingers twitched at his sides like he was holding himself together by a thread. She knew. Hannah had known all this time, and yet she had still chosen him over me, because I had been the easier one to hate, because I had been the one who had gotten caught first. The breaking point. For months I had hated myself. For months I had convinced myself that I was the only villain in this story. But now, standing in front of Tim, the man I had spent 20 years building a life with, I realized something. He was the real monster. He was the one who had taken advantage of a girl barely out of her teens. He was the one who had manipulated our daughter into hating me, just so he wouldn't have to face the consequences of his own actions. And yet, I was the one suffering. I was the one alone. Not anymore. I took a slow step forward, lowering my voice. You might have won her over for now, I said. Tim narrowed his eyes. What are you talking about? I smiled, a cold, knowing smile. A day she's going to see you for who you really are. And when that day comes, I leaned in, my voice dropping to a whisper. You'll lose her too. Tim's face pale. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes, because he knew I was right. He knew this wasn't over. And just like that, I turned and walked away. The aftermath. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't fall apart. I didn't sit in my empty house and drown in regret. Instead, I felt something else entirely. Freedom. Because I had spent too much time blaming myself, too much time believing I was the only one who had sinned. But the truth? We were all guilty. Hannah, Tim, Lou, every single one of us. And now I was done being the only one carrying the weight of it. For the first time in 3 months, I picked up my phone. And instead of calling Hannah, I let her go. If she ever wanted to hear my side of the story, she knew where to find me. But I wasn't going to wait around for her to forgive me, because I didn't need her forgiveness anymore. I had finally forgiven myself. Thought I knew the truth. I thought I had finally uncovered everything. That Tim was the real monster. That Hannah had chosen him over me. That I had been living in a carefully constructed lie for years. But what I was about to discover, it was so much worse. 1 week later, the video of Tim and Maggie had been my breaking point. I had confronted him. I had walked away. And for the first time, I felt free. Or at least, I thought I was. Until I got another email. No subject, no message, just another video attachment. At first, I debated deleting it. I had seen enough. I had suffered enough. But something inside me told me to open it. And when I did, my entire world shattered all over again. The second video. This time, the footage wasn't grainy. It was clear as day. A different hotel room, a different time, but still Tim and Maggie. Only this time, they weren't alone. A second figure entered the frame. A woman, tall, blonde, familiar. It was Hannah. My lungs seized. My stomach dropped. No, 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 no. This wasn't possible. I must have been seeing things. But then Hannah turned toward the camera and smiled. The rest of the video blurred before my eyes. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I couldn't process what I was seeing. But the truth was undeniable. Hannah had known about Tim and Maggie because she had been involved, because she had been part of it, because this wasn't just a betrayal. This was something else entirely, something sick, something beyond anything I had ever imagined. The horror of realization. I scrambled back from my laptop as if the video itself was toxic. My pulse pounded. My hands shook. I felt sick. Hannah, my own daughter, hadn't been manipulated. She hadn't been an innocent victim. She had been complicit. She had known about Tim and Maggie. She had wanted me to take the fall. She had set me up. I replayed every moment in my mind. The night she caught me and Nate, the disgust in her voice, the way she stormed out and never looked back. And now I understood why. Because it had never been about me and Nate. Because she had been hiding something bigger. Because she had been terrified I would discover her own secrets. So she had done the only thing she could do. She had turned me into the villain first. The truth about Hannah, the realization hit me like a freight train. Hannah had never been the sweet, innocent girl I thought she was. She had always been manipulative, always been calculating, and I had been blind to it. From the time she was a child, she had always known how to twist things to her advantage, how to cry at the right moment, how to play the victim, how to make people choose her side. And when I had given her the perfect excuse to hate me, she had used it. Because as long as I was the villain, no one would ever look at her. No one would ever suspect what she had done. Confrontation, the final battle. I had two choices. I could pretend I never saw the video, or I could face her. And for the first time since this entire nightmare began, I wasn't afraid anymore. So I grabbed my keys and I drove straight to her apartment. She opened the door, surprised to see me. "Mom?" Her voice was hesitant, guarded. Good. She knew something was wrong. I stepped inside without being invited, and without wasting a second, I said, "I saw the video." Her entire body stiffened. She didn't ask which one. She already knew. Her expression flickered for just a moment. Shock, fear, then something else. Something dangerous. And then, just like that, she smiled. "You weren't supposed to see that." I recoiled, not at her word, not at her lack of shame, but at the way she said it. So calmly, so casually, like she was annoyed, not caught. Like this was a minor inconvenience, not a life-destroying revelation. Who was she? How long? I whispered. Hannah shrugged. "Does it matter?" My vision blurred. "You destroyed me," I said. "You let me take the fall. You let me think I was the worst person in the world." She tilted her head. "You weren't exactly innocent, were you?" I snapped. I lunged, grabbing her wrist. Her eyes widened in shock, but not fear. No, she was amused, like this was just another game to her. Like she had already won. And maybe she had. Because how do you fight someone who has no soul? "You're sick," I whispered. She smiled again. And then she said the words that broke me for good. "I learned from the best. The final decision. I could have fought. I could have screamed. I could have burned everything to the ground. But what would have been the point? Hannah wasn't my daughter anymore. Maybe she never had been. So I did the only thing I could. I let her go. I walked out the door. And this time I knew I would never look back. The true ending. For months I'd been searching for redemption. For months I'd been begging for forgiveness. But now I finally understood the truth. There was no forgiveness here. No redemption. Just monsters. And I had spent my whole life loving them. But now I was finally free. 1 week later, I had spent days trying to process it all, trying to make sense of the monsters I had created, the family I had lost, and the life I had shattered. But the truth was simple. There was nothing left to save. There was no marriage to salvage, no daughter to bring back, no redemption waiting for me on the other side of the guilt. For months I had been waiting for closure, for a second chance, for a miracle. But now I realized sometimes the only way to move forward is to walk away completely. And that's exactly what I was going to do. I was going to disappear. The goodbye letters. I sat at the dining table, the same one we had all gathered around for years, and took a deep breath. Then I picked up the pen and I wrote the 3 hardest letters of my life. To Tim, I used to think I knew you. I used to believe in the vows we made, in the home we built, in the love I thought was real. But now I see that we were just pretending, holding on to something that had already crumbled beneath us long ago. Maybe I broke us first, or maybe you did. Or maybe we were always broken and it just took this for us to finally see it. I don't hate you. I don't love you. I feel nothing now, and maybe that's worse. But it's also what I need. You won't hear from me again. Goodbye. To Nate. You were never supposed to mean anything, and yet you did. I don't regret you, not the way I should. What I regret is losing myself in you, believing for even a moment that I could rewrite my story through you. But you were never my salvation, and I was never yours. Whatever you're looking for, I hope you find it. Just know that you won't find it here. You and I, we were just a moment. And now, that moment is over. Goodbye. To Hannah. I loved you more than anything in this world, and maybe that was my greatest mistake. I loved you so much that I never saw the darkness in you. I never saw what you were capable of. Maybe you never saw me as a mother at all, just an obstacle, just someone to destroy before I could destroy you first. And maybe, in your mind, you won. Maybe you think you beat me. But I promise you this. You'll spend the rest of your life searching for something real, and you will never find it. Because real love doesn't come from control, from manipulation, from lies. It comes from something far more pure, far more selfless, and that is something you will never understand. You are my greatest heartbreak and my greatest regret, but not my prison, not anymore. I'm leaving, Hannah, and this time I'm not looking back. Goodbye. The last sunrise. I stood at the doorway of my now empty house, staring at the walls that had once been filled with love, with laughter, with life. But now it was nothing but a shell, a place that had died long before I even realized it. I placed the letters on the kitchen counter, one for each of them. And then I walked out the door, not just from the house, not just from the past, but from everything, from all of them. Because there was nothing left to say, nothing left to fight for, nothing left at all. One last look. I drove until the house was just a memory in my rearview mirror, until the town that had buried me was gone, until I was no longer a wife, no longer a mother, no longer the villain of someone else's story. I didn't know where I was going. And for the first time in a long, long time, I didn't care. Because for the first time I was free. And that was enough. A house no longer a home. I stood at the doorway of the house that had once held my entire life. It felt foreign now, hollow and stripped of warmth, like a body without a soul.